Hi, welcome to this session. We're going to look at change. Now, change is one of the 5 characteristics of projects in that two things. First of all, we're making changes to the organization or some part thereof of the organization. That's what we're putting in place, a beneficial change, right? But also the projects themselves are subject to change as we go through them. From a point of view of the scope, from a point of view of the direction, people can change, understanding how the solution may develop can change as well. And for some strange reason, we like things to change, but we don't. We like things to change in the projects, but we don't. We're trying to resist change in projects or put things in the way that make it very much more difficult to do that. But we need to do some form of controlling change, because if we don't, what will happen is it will all get out of control, right? There's a very famous project that was taking place in the US towards the end of the 20th century, in the 1960s to 80s, looking at building an army personnel carrier. And part of that was that as the senior members of the forces started to look at this army personnel carrier, which is basically a bus to carry 15 bods out to the front and back again, so it's going to be fairly protective, but quick and lightweight, right? They decided to start beefing it up, changing how it looked. The thing was, at the time, the project manager wasn't recording the change and getting it properly signed off. And what did they end up after 30 years or 25 years, whatever it was? They ended up with a tank, which is rather different. This is a fighting machine rather than a personnel carrier, really. Fighting machine that's got a big gun on it, lots of smaller guns, very heavily plated, a lot of ammunition, a lot of fuel, and can only carry 3 people. Basically the opposite of what it was supposed to be. So we need to control change, but sensibly, because at the end of the day, we've got to end up with the right solution. So we need to accept that change is inevitable, right? It is inevitable. Inevitable in any project to ensure that we end up with the right solution. Right? We need to make sure we end up with the right solution that the business wants. And sometimes what they feel at the beginning, from a point of view of the overall vision, may change. And not only that, as we go through the smaller requirements and products or features that make up that overall vision may well change as well. So they're still not with the same vision, but it's different. For instance, if you want to sail from, say, Portsmouth or from a port to another port on another part of your country or another country, like Portsmouth to Calais, for example, as I was going to say. And of course, you have a plot of where you're going to go, so we need clear objectives, obviously. But how you get there is, look, the tides, how busy the channel is, or the waterway you're going to go on, and the weather, and your own feelings as well, right? Therefore, all these things are part of, and your rationale to why you're going there in the first place. And that might change as well, more seriously, than how you're going to end up getting there. So these are all part of projects. Change happens. Accept it. It's just making sure that we control it properly. And this is the key thing. So in another session, we look at the delivery plan and what might happen if there's a change in scope. What we're going to look at in a moment is how do we handle that in a little more detail. Because at the end of the day, you've got to go back with some sort of recommendation as to what to do next. What alternatives may be the case as well. What you're doing is really the business need to make that decision. All the project manager is doing is providing with the information to help them do that, right? So we're going to look at that in a moment. Now, there are 2 aspects of the solution as it is from a point of view of the products and requirements that we look at the very beginning to help us understand a bit more about the change and therefore understand what the solution is supposed to do. And this is using prioritization. Prioritization to help us look at, right, what must be delivered. Yeah, I know it sounds a bit about Moscow, but really what we're looking at the mandatory, the high-level requirements, whatever you want to call them, those requirements that have to be delivered for the solution to work. So we do the musts, right, and we see that as the breadth of scope. So these requirements represent the breadth of scope, right? The rest, those that we should and could deliver, right? So those down at levels 2, 3, and 4, we've got the high level, medium, and lows, whatever the medium and lows are here. These represent the depth, the features that if they are missing, preferably these rather than these, if they are missing, will not impact on that solution delivering the beneficial change that we're after. Right. So we've now got a separation between the two. We'll look at that in more detail in another session as well. But really, these requirements here are under the control of the personal group of people representing the users where this change is going to go into place, right? That part of the business. Because any of those change from either being debugged or something going promoted to it needs to ensure that it is part of the solution. It is a crucial part of the solution, right? These down here, these requirements here, it shoulds and coulds, because the coulds are really looking at a contingency point of view. So I'll put that here. These are really part of my contingency. These are the depth that will not impact on the solution. And what we're saying is two things. We're empowering the team. So with these, we empower the team doing the work, right, to make a decision about whether they change their priority from a project perspective, should to a could to a should, or even become won'ts. They're not going to be part of the solution anymore, if you want to use the Moscow terminology. We're empowering the team to make decisions about that within their framework. This is giving them the opportunity to do that, because we know they're not going to impact on the solution. If any of these are going to impact on the musts, right, either they need promoted or something up here is not quite right, then that needs to be signed off by the senior members in the project team, at the project level in particular. And that has to be escalated through the project manager. And we'll look at how we do that in a little more detail in a moment. But this empowerment is also, from an aspect, exception, manage by exception. Basically, don't come and knock on my door unless you need my intervention, because it's really now out of your authoritative control. It's no longer within your power, right? And that usually means up here is going to impact on the must-haves, for instance, those that are going to need to be delivered. So we need to go upwards, escalate through the project manager and say, excuse me, we need some advice from the senior members of the project team now, because they have to tell us what to do next. We'll give their version of how we're going to handle this next. What the PM will do is give them some advice or give them some recommendations. So we're going to look at that sort of pathway as a guidance on the way to take it. Remember, anything that has to go like this, it's got to go through, a pathway to take it a step at a time, to make sure we're not trying to give a recommendation without having thought it out first, understanding what the impact is going to be. So this is what we're going to look at in a moment, right? But just understand that change needs to happen. We just have to make sure that as we document things, if it's change, then it is signed off by the right people. Here, we're empowering the team to make that decision, but obviously it will be tracked in the reviews through the time box or the work package at the end of that particular stage or increment, and overall in the project why that decision was made. If it's going to impact on the further up, then it has to be raised up and go through a bit of a more of a formal challenge in that respect, but still do it collaboratively. Okay, so if we're adding scope and it's a must-have, as we see in another session, how do we track that through? So we're going to look at that in a little more detail in a moment. But remember, it's about manage by exception, if you like. It's about empowerment. There's no difference really. Once it's out of your bounds, you need to come and tell us about it so we can provide some information, a decision, to help provide some decision about what's going on and direction within the project. And that's what we're doing. So how do we handle change? Well, obviously, first of all, someone will raise an issue, right? That issue may well be impacting on the must, or we need to make a change to that must-have. An issue, I need to add something to the scope, and it's going to impact on the breadth of the scope. Right? So we need to understand what that is. So obviously, we need to record that first of all. So we record that in change log, whatever you want to call it, an issue log, whatever it happens to be. Right? So we look at issues now. These things come out of the blue. There's no plan for them. Right? We didn't think about it before. So now we've got to react to it. Issues, we have to react to them. Okay, so we manage risks, but we respond to issues. That's always a good thing to remember. We manage risk because we understand it before it happens. Maybe it never happened. But when it comes to an issue, we have to respond because now we have to react to it. And therefore, start getting around and sorting something out. So the first thing is to record it. And part of that will be to look at, its severity, etc., and impact at a high level. So record it, right? So record it, capture it, whatever you want to do, right? The next thing is now to get a bit more information from that. So now we want to take it to the next step. So I'm going to change the color a bit. Once we've recorded it, now we do need to look at it and have more detail about the impact and the severity of this. They decide whether, do I need to escalate it? It's beyond our control, as they say, or can I deal with them? We might have to escalate this to decide whether we can handle it or whether it needs now to go to a high level to decide on what's going to happen next, right? And therefore take a serious view of it. You can either log it and just trap it in the review point here. If it's low, then obviously it might go into the review of the time box or the particular time frame you're in. All right, if it's high, then we have to escalate. At that point, now the ownership goes up to the next level. And what we now need to do is to make some recommendations. So at this point now, we have to make some recommend some action, right? Which might be a few variations. We can put the time box here, we can do that over there. We might need to go and do this particular proposal and react on something. So it's a generic change, but I'm also looking at the change of the scope as well, and primarily, because that happens in more cases than ever. So recommend what action I need to do with that particular change. So if we're adding, for instance, an extra part of the scope, and it's going to impact on the breadth, how do I cope with that? Because something's going to now got to give. And as I said, we look at that in detail through the delivery plan, looking at that particular impact on it. So we make some recommendation to the project level so they can make a decision about it. So then they will then decide, right? If I'll do that in orange, they will then decide which action they're going to take. So the board will make a decision as to which action they are going to take that you've proposed to them, which might be adding the requirement here, over there, or whatever it is with the issue you've got in place. Some time ago, we had an issue with a data center, and the guys doing the cabling came around one morning and said, we've got a concern about where to bore a hole through a couple of walls to take some cables across the other side of a corridor. So this was an issue out of the blue, even though being scheduled. They didn't actually think about it until that morning when they were going to do the work. But it turned out that wasn't actually really the critical problem, where to bore the hole. It was why we were having to take the cables across in the first place. Because this was like 2,000 Ethernet cables. That's a lot of cabling, right? And a lot of cables. In the end, what it meant was the design was not quite the best way to design it, so we got it redesigned so the equipment they needed to connect to was in the same room. And that avoided having to bore holes and put a lot of cabling through. In fact, all we had to do is putting 2 fiber optic cables through. It actually circumvented a bigger problem further down the track, or a bigger issue, I should say, when the redesign of the network meant instead of having 2,000, we'd have had 16,000 cables going through a hole in the wall, or 2 holes in the wall. As it turned out, we only needed 8 fiber optics. So some things can actually come up quicker. The thing is, an issue that we needed to respond to. So we understood the impact, looked at the escalation because I needed to get other people to make the decision, put the recommendations in through, in other words, move the equipment, got the sign off they could do that. So they made the decision, and then you implement the plan. So what you do is you then implement that decision. Implement. So it's just a case of deciding and documenting and keeping everything up to date. It's just taking a logical pathway through, really. Something comes up an issue, you've got to have a quick look at the view and decide, document it obviously if you wish to, especially if it looks like it's going to have to be escalated. You document it initially in the review related to that particular time frame. If you think it's going to be out of your authoritative control, empowerment, then you need to raise it as an escalation and say, we've got a situation here. You would usually do that with some sort of recommendation or recommendations, because now the decision has to be made by the business, hence in orange. So the business will make the decision and then you'll implement it, whatever that happens to be. Not spelled implement properly anyway. So we have to implement that particular plan that's gone in place, whatever that decision is. So it's just taking a step at a time and understanding how do I get through that and making sure we get the right people to make the right decision and an authoritative sign off. So if I need to extend the delivery plan, as you see if you watch the other session, if I need to extend the delivery plan or add a time box in, which is a cost, there's nothing wrong in doing this, so long as the right people authoritatively sign off that change and approve it. This is the real point. They need to approve it and sign it off. Because if that's what I need to do and that's what the project needs for it to carry on working, absolutely. If they turn around and say, look, this isn't going to work anymore, this is too much of an impact, what do? You close the project. That's as simple as that. You know, go to the end of the game, close the project, end of the plan now, and then shut it down in a different way. And that is really handling change, right? So all sorts of things going on. You know, don't get too bogged down in too much. It's just making sure we get the right people to sign off authoritatively, collaborative decisions, making sure, again, as we saw, the quality of the process to help us do that. Again, it's part of that informed decision, looking at what the solution, the recommendations are that are realistic for the solution so the business can work out. Okay? So understand, make sure we get the right solution by prioritizing, understand who's got the control on the different levels, the breadth and the depth of the scope, where that is, manage by exception. When a change comes in place, it's just making sure that we handle it step by step, a little bit at a time to make sure that we get the right decisions on the right solution.